great to have you here today. You heard certainly the plan coming from Department of Defense and the Army and what we need, and want to hear your perspective, not only what you heard, but what your vision is. So, if you would.
Thank you, Chairman Norcross, Ranking Member Hartzler, and distinguished members of the subcommittee. Good morning. I am Brett Floyer, President of Winchester Ammunition. Winchester is a key supplier of small caliber ammunition to the U.S. warfighter, and we proudly operate the government's Lake City Army Ammunition Plant. Thank you for inviting me here today to discuss Lake City and the important role it plays in the industrial base in support of the United States warfighter. Lake City is the nation's only government-owned small caliber ammunition plant employing more than 1,700 highly skilled people. Today, Winchester can operate Lake City at a high level of readiness because of significant historic investments made to equipment, processes, infrastructure, as well as current production funding. However, Lake City is an 80-year-old facility built during World War II. It sits on approximately 4,000 acres with over 300 separate structures, many beyond their serviceable life that must be maintained, updated, or replaced. Winchester engages daily in the development of long-term strategic initiatives with the government in support of the master plan and how it relates to the ongoing modernization and transformation of Lake City. Key and immediate actions needed, some of which are included in the master plan, are ongoing improvements in Lake City safety, manufacturing processes, infrastructure improvements, cybersecurity, and eliminating single points of failure. The tip of the spear that furthers the change of Lake City to a transformational small caliber facility is the 6.8 Next Generation Squad Weapon Program. The 6.8 NGSW will bring transformational safety systems, facility design, manufacturing processes to Lake City, and a new cartridge for the first time in more than 50 years. Winchester has safely and efficiently operated ammunition facilities for more than 150 years, supplying the U.S. warfighter since World War I. While we need little assistance in most areas of the day-to-day operation, there are key areas to consider for maintaining and improving a high level of readiness to serve the warfighter. First, our employees are highly skilled in small caliber ammunition manufacturing, facilities management and construction, equipment design and build, and high explosives operations. Consistent and predictable funding is required to maintain the readiness of this highly skilled workforce and support ongoing modernization efforts. In short, the ever-increasing competitive workforce landscape requires job security that only comes through secure funding. Second, the 6.8 NGSW program is critical to establishing a best-in-class small caliber manufacturing operation and is consistent with the overall goal of the modernization of Lake City. Ongoing funding support for this state-of-the-art program is required. As this new cartridge is developed and stood up at Lake City, we must not lose sight of the fact that funding must also remain strong for the current operations to address key areas of Lake City that are beyond their serviceable life. And last, Winchester does fully support the Army Ammunition Plant Modernization Plan. The plan addresses significant projects required at Lake City to improve technology and critical infrastructure deficiencies that will ultimately maximize reliability and readiness. Rapid modernization and transformation of Lake City requires ongoing partnering between all stakeholders and requires timely decisions to drive successful execution of the plan. On behalf of Winchester's entire workforce, I want to say we are proud of the support we provide to the nation's warfighters. I thank you for the opportunity to discuss Lake City and Winchester's dedication to the mission and look forward to your questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. Good morning, Chairman Norcross, Ranking Member Hartzler, and distinguished members of the subcommittee. I appreciate the opportunity to appear before the subcommittee to testify on the possible ways and means of successfully modernizing the U.S. production of conventional ammunition. I am pleased to be joined by my fellow witnesses, all of whom I have personally worked with and respect as distinguished industry colleagues. I also wish to acknowledge our Army leadership present here this morning, whose mission we all proudly serve. I also wish to thank this committee for your continued support of the ammunition industrial base, as well as your keen interest in the needed modernization of our vital production enterprise. I am honored to be here today representing General Dynamics Ordnance and Tactical Systems as the Senior Vice President of the Munition Systems Business Unit. In addition to serving as the systems integrator for over 60 configurations of fielded ammunition end items, General Dynamics Ordnance and Tactical Systems is also the most prolific producer of energetics, components, and subsystems servicing the U.S. munitions and missile sectors. Our Munition System Business Unit is dedicated to providing full families of tactical and training ammunition across all medium and large calibers of ammunition. I am especially proud to be representing our 1,600 employees operating across our 10 operating locations. My focus today pertains on our Scranton operations, where we operate the Scranton Army Ammunition Plant. General Dynamics took over operation of the Scranton plant in 2006 when General Dynamics acquired Chamberlain Manufacturing, and we have been the continuous operator ever since. The dedicated 265 Scranton employees produce metal parts or projectile bodies for all U.S. Army and Marine Corps artillery programs, as well as Navy 5-inch 54 programs. The Scranton Army Ammunition Plant is truly a national strategic asset, producing in excess of 28 million artillery and mortar projectile bodies over the past 60-plus years. It is a highly specialized manufacturing center with production capabilities and capacities unmatched anywhere in the free world. Our Scranton workforce is proud of its safety record and the reliability of its products in support of our U.S. artillery and mortar units in the battlefield. At the present time, the Scranton Army Ammunition Plant faces a dual challenge in modernizing both its aged infrastructure as well as its production capabilities to meet current and future mortar and artillery needs. This is particularly challenging as we are preparing to produce the next generation of artillery projectiles that will be fielded as part of the Army's artillery modernization efforts. This will involve introduction of multiple new projectiles configurations, each requiring some level of unique production equipment and tooling. More importantly, though, is the need for critical infrastructure upgrades that are an absolute imperative in restoring the requisite production capability required to fulfill Scranton's core mission. Our Army customer has been actively working with us to identify and fund these critical infrastructure improvements, with several Scranton facility projects being ready for funding and execution yet this year. This includes an imminent award to modernize Scranton's production capability to support the production of the next generation 155mm XM1128 projectiles. We applaud the U.S. Army's innovative thinking and approach in accelerating this effort and award. My primary concern is the need to maintain a continued focus on this type of transactional velocity, the ability to obligate funding and execute modernization scope on time and under budget. I believe this is the way that we, the U.S. industrial base, can meet the U.S. Army's long-range precision fires modernization and fielding timelines with a collaborative strategic focus. The Scranton Army Ammunition Plant will remain an integral component of the U.S. Army's artillery modernization success. Our proud Scranton team, in conjunction with our U.S. Army stewards, stand ready to not only meet this modernization challenge, but exceed the fielding objectives of the U.S. Army's must-have long-range precision fires mission. I look forward to answering your questions and informing a success path for modernizing the U.S. production of conventional ammunition. Thank you.
Thank you. Sir?
Good morning. Chairman Norcross, Ranking Member Hartzler, members of the subcommittee, thank you for inviting me here today to discuss modernizing and sustaining the Army's ammunition facilities. I will deliver an abbreviated statement now and ask that my full written statement be entered into the record. I'm grateful for the opportunity to provide industry perspective on this important mission and the people who support it. As a quick introduction, BAE Systems is the operator of two GOCO sites, the Radford Army Ammunition Plant in Radford, Virginia, and the Holston Army Ammunition Plant located in Kingsport, Tennessee. These two sites are essential to Army's firepower mission across a range of platforms. I am proud of the work that we do in support of the U.S. military. Through our unique heritage, BAE Systems is qualified as an explosive chemical manufacturer. As the industry leader in energetics manufacturing, we are committed to partnering with the U.S. government on modernization. Before I go further, I want to take a moment to highlight and put a spotlight on the dedication of the people at Radford and Holston during the COVID-19 pandemic. They, along with our defense industrial-based colleagues, showed up every day under difficult circumstances to deliver the readiness to our warfighter. They absolutely deserve our gratitude. While it may appear on the surface that GOCO sites have common themes and adjoining elements, not all GOCO sites in the organic industrial base are created equally. Radford and Holston have common elements like large acid chemical plants and specialty chemical production, while the others focus on mechanical load and assembly pack facilities or storage and demilitarization. It should be our highest priority to continue to modernize and transform Radford and Holston into state-of-the-art chemical processing facilities, as our nation's entire munition supply starts at these two sites. This is vital for our national security. I want to share three perspectives about the important challenges of modernizing facilities like Radford and Holston. First, the modernization of these sites is a long-term journey. These are capitally intensive, and projects of any meaningful size take years to execute. Both sites have undergone limited modernization over the past 20 years. The commitment to a long-term strategy, as well as stable and predictable funding, is essential to transforming and modernizing Radford and Holston through complex projects that will take place over time. Second, more funding, even above the Army's recommendation, accelerates improvements for the scale of modernization required. Over the last decade, these sites have seen improvements, including a $1 billion investment in research department explosives, otherwise RDX, capability at Holston, and tens of millions of dollars of investment in a new nitrocellulose facility at Radford. BAE Systems itself has invested more than $100 million at both sites combined. While this is a substantial amount of funding, I think it's important to understand these investments are only for building replacements to maintain current processes. There has not been timely, adequate, or predictable funding at a rate necessary to develop new, modern facilities that meet the needs of the 21st century operation that is both safer, more reliable, and environmentally friendly. We need a greater focus on long-term operations rather than just managing day-to-day fixes. Recognizing the capital-intensive nature of this work, we believe that reasonable periods of performance should be a standard across all GOCO contracts. I recommend a performance period of no less than 25 years to give contractors the opportunity to invest and realize necessary returns on those investments. Finally, while the strategy defines projects and funding levels, the current modernization strategy does not adequately recognize the challenges of simultaneously exercising modernization and meeting production levels. I emphasize this not as a criticism of the strategy, rather as a focus on the work that Army and industry must engage to modernize these facilities. There are real and difficult trades around cost, schedule, technology, and production rates. If we are to execute modernization successfully, then we must find an approach that strikes that right balance between today's production needs and construction of tomorrow's future plant. I'd like to thank the subcommittee again for bringing attention to this critical issue and recognizing industry's role in this important mission. Thank you, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you. General?
Chairman Norcross, Ranking Member Hartzler, and distinguished members of the Tactical Air and Land Forces Subcommittee. Thank you for inviting me to testify about this important subject, and I think it's an honor for me to be here with you today. I think I offer a unique perspective on this challenging task because I've literally sat on both sides of this panel. My last duty assignment, while on active duty, was a Program Executive Officer for Ammunition and the Commanding General of Picatinny Arsenal. More recently, for the past 5 years, I have been the President of American Ordnance, responsible as the operating contractor for both the Milan, Tennessee, and the Iowa Army ammunition plants. Both of these facilities are over 30 square miles each and were built in 1941. They are big and they are old. While the Milan facility is a state of transition, the Iowa plant provides the nation a facility in size, scope, and surge capability unmatched in the national organic industrial base. The purpose of the Iowa facility is to load and assemble and pack medium caliber and tank munitions, C4 products such as the M112 block and the mine line clearing charge, energetic products such as mortar prop charges and modular artillery charge systems, indirect fire products such as artillery and mortars, and unique warhead capability, producing warheads for Javelin, Stinger, Hellfire, Sidewinder, and additional specialty warheads. to include supporting the Department of Energy. The first topic you asked me to discuss was an explanation of current modernization initiatives. In the case of the Iowa facility, the major initiative is a long-range precision artillery production facility. We are just completing the 30% design phase of this important capability. We'll complete the 90% design phase in the summer of 2023, and we will enter the construction phase beginning in the government's fiscal year 2024. We were fortunate that early on in the planning process, Dr. Bruce Zeddy visited the plant when he was the Assistant Secretary of the Army for Acquisition, Logistics, and Technology. The visit prompted him to not only draft his vision for the Iowa facility, but also draft up a set of planning tenets that subsequently became the planning objectives for future modernization projects across the Army's organic industrial base, as outlined in the Army's ammunition plant modernization plan. The second topic I was asked to speak was if there are any modifications of law, regulation, or practices. I would suggest two, but in the interest of time, will refrain from going in more depth, but would be happy to address in questions. The first is a review of Title 10 U.S. Code 2692, entitled Storage, Treatment, and Disposal of Non-Defense Toxic and Hazardous Materials. The specific request would be to allow GOCO contractors to lease space to commercial contractors that use explosives, such as the mining industry. These lease fees can bring in revenue to help reduce the operating contractor's overhead costs due to meeting the government's performance work statement requirements. The second item would be more widespread use of FAR Clause 52-216-4, Economic Price Adjustment, Labor and Material. In today's rapidly changing environment, translating into increasing inflation rates we have not seen in decades, this is becoming more and more difficult to get price quotes that are valid for longer than 30 days. As defense contractors, we must take these short-term quotes and respond to government solicitation asking for 5-year, sometimes 10 years, firm fixed pricing. And I can understand why the government likes firm fixed price contracts. However, in today's environment, I'm not sure the Department of Defense really gets the best value in these instances. The last item you asked me to address would identify any other consideration for GOCO operations. In this area, I would suggest a recognition of the unique costs put on government in running a GOCO. One of the challenges confronting GOCO operators is the Army has a set of requirements written in the form of performance work statements that the operating contractor must perform. These costs are then rolled up in the pricing of the products we make. Some of these requirements are above and beyond which a contractor at a commercial facility would incur. In the case of Iowa, we must compete for our business. When compared to a commercial facility, this is like your competitor running a 100-meter dash when you have to run 120 meters. But I want to be very clear. We're not looking for a handout. What we're looking for is a level playing field to compete, and then it's up to us. In summary, I want to thank you again for allowing the operating contractors to participate in the discussion today. The organic industrial base is a crucial component to the overall national industrial base and forms the nation's insurance policy, especially when it comes to wartime surge requirements. I appreciate your time, and I look forward to your support of these vital facilities and to answer any questions you may have. Thank you.
Thank you for your testimony. Took several notes, and it goes to the heart of why we wanted you in. The relationship that started under GOCO's decades ago was because your power, your experience, your workforce, your ability to be flexible, and certainly your technical expertise. That's why you're here. The partnership that you have is unique in ways that are very different than normal industry, but in most ways, you're a business. You're running it, and there's risk, but there's also reward. And trying to get that right for both sides is always the challenge. We have a new modernization plan. Each of you spoke to your input on it. I'm not going to ask you, did it reflect it in the end product? Well, we can have those conversations later, but obviously making those decisions are based on the information that you gave them, but also what they know and what they want to have. So we have a plan, and it's coming together. There's risk. I've been to most of the plants, and some of you have a lot more risk than others because of the facility. Generally, you sat on both sides of the table and you understand it. And when I get a chance on the second round, I want to ask you about some of the items that you brought up. But are we using you effectively in the contractual relationships we have? And you're each unique. We compete. You use 25 years. That's a lifetime. We like to think 2 years is a lifetime. We live in those cycles, so we do understand that. But to make investments, are the incentives that we've set up working? What can we do better? So why don't we start with you, Mr. Flower?
Well, I think the first part of that question was related to our involvement in the, the development of the modernization plan. As I mentioned in my opening statement, I do believe that we are engaged quite a bit with the Army and the government as a whole in the development of the needs of Lake City. That starts at the very low level of us producing a call letter list that identifies the key areas of concern of projects that need to happen at Lake City to support the modernization. It gets rolled up then into an ADEP plan, Area Development Execution Plan, and then focuses up to the modernization plan. So I do feel that we have a lot of input into that plan.
This is for each of you. When you put that plan together, obviously you're looking through your lens. You're not necessarily, or are you including that single point of failure into those calculations? Or does that take place once you submit it?
I think that really both. I mean, it's part of the thinking and going into the plan, but it also is part of that execution and after the plan is put together. On our single points of failure at Lake City, those are identified very clearly in our plans. We currently work on each one of those to identify alternative materials, alternative supply, and we have inventory strategies to mitigate as well. Yes, sir.
Thank you for the question. Number one, I think that the plan very much took into account what we were looking for at Scranton. I mentioned in my testimony there's two elements really at Scranton. We're preparing the facility for a number of new projectiles that are going to support the Army's artillery modernization plan. That's one element. The other element is the infrastructure piece of an aged facility. I think the plan has elements of both that we have submitted, worked with our Army customer. I think there's some prioritization and some timing challenges or changes that we might want to see, but overall we were very pleased with what came out in that plan. In terms of whether or not we're being used effectively, I do believe that our partnership leverages that to the greatest extent possible. The Army is absolutely collaborating with us as we develop these modernization plans, and I'm confident that our input is taken into consideration, and that's reflected in the plan that was submitted. And I think that just speaks to the partnership that we continue to have with the Army.
So looking at the plan, I think generally our inputs were well taken and reflected in the plan. So there was good coordination, as my colleagues have pointed out. On the effectiveness question, I think I would point to three things. For each of our sites, there's some unique commercial aspects of what we do. So I'll borrow Mr. McGinnis's analogy of running a 100-meter race, but actually being asked to run 120 meters. And that makes it very challenging for us to take advantage of the commercial opportunities that these sites could access, which would improve affordability for the Army. Similarly, for the Army, is workloading these facilities. These are U.S. government sites, so bringing as much work as possible to these sites, while it does benefit the contractor, is really about the best benefit to the U.S. Army and the taxpayer. Secondly, the reference to 25 years. If I look to my commercial chemical colleagues, when they proceed to build something like a large assets facility, which we've just completed in Holston, they don't have to contemplate that investment in the thought that within a short period of time, much less than 25 years, they might turn the keys to that facility over to another operator. Makes the investment really challenging. Lastly, on the effectiveness, I think Radford and Holston represent a place where the Army and contractor have improved significantly through the modernization journey. This morning's comments highlighted both the challenges in the NC facility at Radford and then spoke to what we've done at Holston in terms of a massive $1 billion modernization around RDX. And you see those projects being executed well and on time to deliver that capacity and improve both safety and environmental performance at Holston.
Sir, I appreciate the question. The first part of that question about the modernization plan, I would say that we did have a lot of input. There was a lot of discussion. And at the end of the day, there's a lot of priority shifting that has to be set forth. I agree with Mr. Gathright, and even back when I was in uniform, I always saw the ammunition enterprise as a big tree, but the trunk of that tree is Radford and Holston, because without propellant and explosive, there is nothing else. And so we have to get that right as a nation. And then beyond that, the branches and the leaves, that's where the rest of us come in and be able to do that. And so that's what you see in the modernization plan, an emphasis towards the Radford and Holston, and then later on would be, facilities like Iowa that we're going through the design phase now, then the other facilities listed in the plan. In terms of clarifying from our perspective, the 25 years that Mr. Gathright brought up, a lot of times it would be nice to have the 25 years set. Right now, we're currently under a 25-year contract, but it goes under 5-year increments. And so if you are an investment, and the other companies are commercial companies, whereas we're a Day and Zimmerman company, a private company. So for us, it's 3 owners. If we're asking our owners to invest in a facility that every 5 years their option could be up, it's very difficult for them. But they won't. But it's not that they won't do it. They've invested over $45 million of their own dollars since American Ordnance has taken over in 2008. So they'll do it. But there is a certainty that has to be there. And in terms of are we being used effectively, it's a complex. It's a very complex environment that we're in, but I would say that everyone is trying their best to make sure that everything is set and our voices are heard. Thank you.
Thank you. Vicki?
Thank you. As you know, last year, the Army came over with a recommendation that severely cut down the number of small caliber ammunition as produced, and it would have resulted in the loss of about 500 jobs there at Lake City. And these are individuals who've worked for years, have an expertise. Many of it, their parents work there, their grandparents, and I just want to thank this subcommittee, the chairman who helped us lead the effort to make sure that money was replaced. And I wonder if you could talk, Mr. Pfluger, about the importance of just having a steady state of budgeting and what that does when the government comes in and cuts it, and what severe ramifications that could have provided for our national defense. And I'd like for all of you to talk about that just a little bit, because that's something the subcommittee has to watch out for.
Sure, thank you for the question. So you're right. If that original budget would have been executed, we would have lost about 500 of our 1,700 jobs there at Lake City. And to us, it's very critical for a lot of reasons. One, we are asked to maintain a level of readiness in our contract at Lake City, and it's very difficult to do that if production funding goes down too much. But probably the most important aspect of reduced budgets and layoffs that may occur when that happens is related to the skill of our workforce. We make ammunition, small caliber ammunition. In the process of making that, we deal with high explosives. We have almost 90 people that we rely on to be well trained in our high explosives operations and our priming operations. If we lose that workforce and the requirements go up, or there's a national emergency, we just can't hire people and train them fast enough. It could take up to a year to train people to get back to that level of skill that we require. So in the art of making ammunition, the skill of our workforce is critical.
Very good. Mr. Gaines, quickly.
Thank you for the question. I echo everything that he just said about the skilled workforce, but I'll also highlight the importance of our supply chain. Many of us depend on a robust supply chain. Much of that is made up of small businesses, and we have these cyclical dips or ups and downs, specifically the downs. It doesn't incentivize them to continue in that role. and therefore your supply chain will get degraded as a result. And I think that's very critical when it comes to budget
Yes,
matriculation.
thank you. Mr. Gathright?
Yeah, I'll echo the same things, but add a couple here. With respect to readiness, we are at the same time talking about minimum sustaining rates while also talking about surge capacity. So that is very difficult to try and talk to a workforce that is really artisan in what they do. And then on the modernization side, we're really talking about highly skilled engineers, construction professionals, and program managers. So being able to have a transparent and level-loaded approach to modernization funding is critical to retaining those jobs in this kind of difficult setting of a GOCO versus operations outside of this kind of environment.
Thank you. Mr. McGinnis?
Ma'am, I really do appreciate your thoughts on the workforce, because that is the driver. When the nation built these ammo plants back in the 1940s, they didn't build them in Fairfax, Virginia. They are out there. And in many respects, they are the main employer for some of the areas of which we're in. And as you mentioned, this is a family lineage of people that have worked at our facilities. And I consider it a moral obligation that we provide good paying jobs for the people in that area. And our operators are, as the gentleman has spoke, they're truly craftsmen. I mean, to operate a 310 press to build a Stinger warhead, a Javelin warhead, takes experience. Or if you are working 800 pounds of molten TNT, producing TNT rounds, you want to have somebody with experience. Yeah. And a state level of funding allows us to be able to maintain a talented workforce. Thank you.
Yes, yes. Mr. Gaines, you oversee the Scranton facility, and in the Army's testimony, they said that there's going to be future investment will repair and replace failing infrastructure, as well as install a new manufacturing line to support production of the next generation of artillery metal parts. Who pays for that new manufacturing line? I'm still trying to figure out who pays for what.
The Army pays for that.
The Army pays for that?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, very good. And then I had a couple questions here. General McGinnis, you had some really great points in your testimony. I think the idea of incorporating the mining industry and utilizing them to have on the site and lease areas, that's something that makes sense to kind of spread the load, bring in some additional investment, and then I think we need to look at this price fixing. That was a good point. But I wanted to ask you about the performance work statements, where you said there's 6 specific areas where you have to comply that the commercial industry doesn't, in safety, fire, security, environmental, material management, maintenance. Do you have a list that breaks down these specific requirements that you have to do that's above commercial, like a comparison between commercial and then what you do in the same areas that we could look at and maybe should review?
We can provide you that list,
Okay.
certainly. For example, we have a fire department and with EMTs that have to be operational 24 hours a day. If a lot of commercial facilities, they would just say opt out and come to an agreement with a local fire department there. We have a 56-person security force that operates the gates 24 hours a day. We have different in terms of safety and environmental inspections, which need to be done and should be done. There's a balance of what is done on a commercial facility, but then there are things to meet Army policies, Army regulations, things of that nature.
Okay, thank you very much.
I can provide that.
Yield back.
And those are the sort of lists we're looking for. Very important. Yes, you're up.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman.
Dr. Deitchle.
We touched a little bit on the prospect of the Army entering into longer contracts, but from a contracting perspective, what could the government do to improve doing business with industry at GOCO AAPs? And you can all chime in.
Sir, I'll start with kind of where I left off in my last comments around the commercial opportunities that are at each of these sites. For Holston and Radford, we provide both the propellant that goes into small caliber rounds that are used by hunters and sportsmen, as well as explosives that are used in various oil and gas opportunities from Holston. So making these accessible, and when we think about trying to do commercial work on a GOCO site where there are these additional regulations that we're complying with, making that accessible for the contractor such that we can bid economically for those opportunities ultimately reduces the cost of operation to the Army for these sites. And I think it ties back to the comments from Ms. Hartzler around the PWS work statements. You know, Radford has just gone through a renegotiation of its contract, and this was an area of focus. I'll say for contractor and Army, there's a lot of frustration about how much these work statements cost the government, but yet we're bound by these requirements in ways that we cannot get to more efficient solutions that are certainly available if we operate it in a more commercial fashion. So I think getting that balance right helps the Army get the most out of the GOCO part of this.
I'd like to add that I think in terms of improving, contracting relationship and execution, more importantly, I think is the speed in which we go through these contracting actions. I think there's a lot of great intent by all parties, and it often seems to get bogged down. Contracting command or any specific agency, it's as an enterprise, we all need to do a little better in terms of executing those contract requirements, especially when it comes to modernization. I think that velocity would really improve things.
I really agree with my colleagues on really studying some of the best commercial practices that are out there and maybe applying those to some of the GOCOs. It definitely adds a lot of cost, and maybe studying those best commercial practices in each one of our situations would be very helpful.
I would just like to add on that, again, the recognition of the performance workstation statements, understanding where that is in terms of the requirements that we are then bringing into our pricing, and then having, say, a predictable level of contracts. As Mr. Gathright said, not all the GOCOs are treated equal, you might say, and so for us, operating Iowa, moving forward, there is no set, say, supply contract where the government says we will be issuing you contracts in these type of areas, which is needed in the explosive and propellant. It's not. So for us, what we would be asking for is a recognition of these. That's all.
Okay. One other question. What does the industry perceive as the most significant threat to the ammunition enterprise supply chain?
I think it's the same that we discussed earlier. It's the significant, having significant secured funding that has continuity from year to year, that encourages our supply chain to make investments. Right now, we struggle with certain supply chains to make investments because of the uncertainty of a 1 year, 2 year contract and not knowing what it is. And that's a challenge also from single points of failure in the supply chain as well.
I'd like to add back to the labor point that Mr. Floyer brought up earlier. Attracting new talent, new young talent into our industry is challenging right now. And that continued funding and that continued pursuit of modernization, not just in facilities but products, I think is critically important to attracting the next generation of talent, which we're always working to do.
I would focus in on the workforce. As much as we talk about single points of failure or overseas sourcing, it's that artisan workforce. And honestly, really looking at the Kingsport area, there are opportunities in the market if we think post-COVID economy. And folks are asking themselves, is this the right job for me as Holston goes through a competition and as they look at opportunities outside of the base? So I think protecting that workforce and growing that next generation of the workforce is essential, first and foremost, to what we do.
Sir, I appreciate the question. In many respects, I would say the most significant threat is a threat we haven't been seeing or thinking about. You know, it seems like we deal in threats every single day, but I think, to agree with the panel, the workforce is paramount to be able to keep them, to be able to attract new talent from the colleges and universities nearby. Supply chain is something that we worry about constantly. There's a bunch of different alligators out there.
Thank you all for your expertise in being here. I yield.
Yeah, Mr. Jackson.
Well, this should be pretty quick. My colleague from Tennessee just asked most of what I was going to ask you about. I was going to ask you about single point of failure in the supply chain, and you kind of addressed that already. There's not a single point of manufacturing. We don't get like a certain, element of the ammunition from one specific supplier or anything like that. Is there anything like that that we should be worried about? I guess would just be expand on what he just asked a little bit. And the other was, I was going to comment that, we have defense industry in my district. We have Pantex and we have Bell Helicopter there. And when I go talk to them, the biggest issue they have, which I think is a big national security issue for us, is the workforce. I mean, they cannot get people to do the jobs, to come to work. And I mean, it's a little bit harder because it's Amarillo, Texas, and, it's kind of in the middle of nowhere. But are you guys experiencing the same kind of issues? It sounds like you are. And I think you gave a little bit of information, but I was going to ask just like what would be your advice to other companies to overcome this? Because if you can't find people to do the job doesn't get done. So thank you.
I'll go first this time. Thank you for your question, sir. Number one, in terms of advice that I would give to some of our industry peers is you have to absolutely demonstrate to your prospective workforce your core values, your strategy. You've got to really put an emphasis on, the culture within our organization. And I don't think that's something that in the past we really had to emphasize. And now we're really out there in terms of marketing our company for a recruiting purpose, not necessarily for a customer purpose. And so I think that's really critical. The earlier question you asked about single points of failure, when it comes to Scranton Army Ammunition Plant, there are other competitors with like capability. So in terms of a single point of failure for Scranton, that really isn't the case.
Okay.
I'll chime in there. I think, Pantex is a critical partner for Holston for the products that we provide on the DOE side. So we talk a lot with our colleagues at Pantex up in Amarillo. I think on the overcoming the challenge, the thing that I feel like our employees do well is really aspire to the mission. And that really reflects on what we've done through the COVID-19 pandemic. These people put themselves at personal risk to deliver munitions that were absolutely essential. And I think that is the part that we've got to continue to bring home to the workforce, to have folks want to come and work on these kind of sites. I think one of the highlights of the work on the RDX expansion at Holston is really trying to address some of those single points of failure. So I think the Army is getting that right as we move forward. And lastly, I would just focus on the foreign sourcing, because this is a key focus for us, so some of the raw chemicals and upstream products that we use. And I think these are absolutely accomplishable things in the United States, but they're not without cost. And I think that's the part of this that we've got to hit face on to understand how to move beyond some of these foreign sourcing challenges.
Thank you, and I will say I think that one of the things that I hear that works sometimes is to focus on recruiting on retired military folks and folks that are transitioning out of the military, because I think that they have somewhat of a natural fit for some of this kind of stuff. And so thankfully there's a lot of folks that get out of the military and want to continue to serve international security position, or a job that's pertinent to our national security. So thank you for your time. I appreciate it, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Thank you. There's a few extra questions, so we're going to go next round if you have time, and really appreciate it. Couple of items, domestic supply chain. Yes, we do things that have environmental regulations. Labor standards are considerably different. Safety has a cost, but it also has a cost if you don't have access to it. So that's the balance, and I think we're starting to realize that the pandemic and the supply chain certainly brought that out on us. New young talent. There's not a committee that has a hearing that this doesn't come up. Particularly, you are unique in the sense that, come work in a place that really dangerous stuff that can kill you in a heartbeat. Not every position you need to be a PhD from Harvard. I understand I went to the other four-year school. It was called an apprenticeship. Society has to make some changes that we value both of those, and that you can have a good job that has benefits and raise your family. And each of you, that's what is critical, is you take care of your employees. And they need to understand it. The pandemic has thrown the curveball. Everybody is evaluating their spot in the universe. And it's going to continue for a little bit, and our families go through the same thing. But when we start talking about investment, and each of you, the major investments, and that's a relative term, you know, the government is going to pay for the facility in the most part. So when we talk 25 years, yes, you're not going to invest $1 billion in a plant for 2-year length of time. There's some things that contractually they can make decisions on, and there's other things we have to change. The NDAA is revving up again. Please, Liz is our lead on this. Those ideas that you mentioned, please expound, get it to her. We want to have a conversation where if this is a good idea, I'd love to try these things and pilot. So we really do. That's why you're here today. And certainly the material cost fixed pricing, depending on how long, right? It's all relative. So we want to talk about that, and certainly level playing field is something that we deal with every day. But I want to give Vicki a chance to go second set, and then we'll wrap this up.
Thank you. So as the managers of these GOCO facilities, do you agree with what we just heard in the first panel, where the Army is proposing $500 million a year funding for a 15-year modernization plan? Do you think that adequately accounts for the rises in costs for both materials and labor due to inflation and material shortages, which General Daly highlighted? What's your thoughts on that? Why don't we go backwards here? So, McGinnis.
Well, ma'am, I appreciate the question, and I appreciate leading this off. You know, it's a balance of priorities. I think the Army showed a very significant commitment to these facilities. My initial remarks back to the Army was that I was very impressed that the Army put projects in dollars in years. That's something that we haven't seen before, and I think it's very important to at least put a mark on the ground. This is what it is. Things can change, but at least it was significant for the Army to be able to do that. So I do appreciate that.
Good. Mr. Cathright?
Yeah, I'd start with the fact that it is a significant increase in the investment that the Army's made. I think two things strike me. Certainly in the near term, volatility in the marketplace is critical, both in raw materials and labor. So that does have a critical impact on some of these modernization construction projects. I think the other aspect of this, and I referenced this in my opening comments, of, you know, at least in the case of Radford, I can speak to, there are shovel-ready projects today that would benefit the workforce that are in this plan, but could be funded sooner if additional funding were allocated. And these would be improvements to operational readiness as well as safety and environmental. So these are projects that are there today where designs are complete.
Can you get us a list of those?
Yes, I can.
Thanks. Mr. Gaines?
Very good question. Thank you very much for asking it. I think we're in a very good shape, specifically compared to a couple years ago when none of this really existed. So for that, we're very thankful. As I mentioned earlier, all the projects that we have been collaborating on with the Army are included in the plan. There are a couple here and there that, you know, may be underfunded in terms of estimates that, you know, in our opinion, but I think by and large, those are small differences that can be easily overcome. But I agree with Mr. Gathright that there are some projects that I think that we can pull forward, that we can execute quicker if the funding is there. And so we would be happy to provide that list of projects if you'd like.
Yes, that'd be great. Thanks.
You know, I agree with my colleagues and don't have a lot to add on top of that, but I do believe that the funding level is appreciated, especially for Lake City and what we see there, and we can actually move to the left if there was increased funding. But there is priorities that have to be established, and I think they were done in the modernization plan.
The last question I had is probably for General McGinnis, but all of you. But I've heard that your production request has not increased due to what's going on in Ukraine. So does that need to be increased? I mean, or were you satisfied with, it seemed like the Army was saying that they're going through this reevaluation stage and then they will come to you with the next contract. So how comfortable do you feel with, are we meeting the needs? Are they coming through?
Ma'am, that's a question I would defer to Mr. Bush, and Mr. Bush, I think, responded to your question on that, saying that there's a response that's going to be imminent,
Okay,
going to be sent over to you.
yeah, Mr. Gathright.
Given that each of these products start with manufacturing in Radford and Holston, I can share with you that we are in discussions with the Army on some of these replacement supplies. So that's moving forward. I think the positive from a Radford and Holston perspective is these products support other weapons as well. So we're able to move forward with that production timely as soon as we complete those discussions with the Army.
Will you be able to meet the increased demand if they come to you and say, we need a whole bunch more?
Yes, ma'am.
Great.
Initial activity has really focused on some reprioritization of production requirements. I think the majority of the activities surrounding Ukraine and providing stockpiles of ammunition to them will come in that secondary tranche of replacement contracts, which we won't see for some time.
I don't have visibility right now on whether or not it's on an increase, but to answer your second part of your question, if it does, we're ready to.
Very good. Well, we all appreciate what you do and how important you are to our national defense, kind of the unsung heroes sometimes I think people just take for granted in this country. Of course, there's bombs, there's ammunition, but it's a lot more goes into that, and I thank you for your diligence every day to make sure that we have what we need. So thank you, and please pass on our appreciation to the workforce. I yield back.
And seeing no other testimony coming, again, on behalf of the committee, thank you for sharing your thoughts. It's good to have you here. Look forward to you coming back and telling us how well the plan is being implemented. We are adjourned.